Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Charlene Sani, and we'll be discussing how does your SEO rank. So this webinar is brought to you by Sitefinity and our premium partner, Spinutech. Spinutech is a full-service digital agency that works very closely with Sitefinity. All right, so Sitefinity and Spinutech will introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to the SEO portion. After that, we'll conduct a little bit of Q&A, meet our speakers today. First is myself, Charlene Sani, part of the partner development team here at Progress. We have our Sitefinity guru and senior sales engineer, MeiLani Dumont. And most importantly, our SEO expert, Derek Larabee from Spinutech, and is a team lead there. So moving on, we're going to introduce Sitefinity, and I'll turn it over to MeiLani.
So again, my name is MeiLani Dumont, and I'm a sales engineer here with the Sitefinity team at Progress Software. And I've been here with the company for a few years now, and have been actually in the content management space, DX space, for well over a decade, probably much more longer than that. Just to talk about, for those who may not know, Progress Software actually has a suite of products that enables you to deliver unique digital experiences to meet your unique business challenges. We have a suite of, again, different solutions to connect, to orchestrate, secure, and deliver those digital experiences involving interconnected data and decisioning. The Sitefinity DX platform allows you to create and manage personalized content and all its necessary metadata, which is an important aspect of SEO, using a simple and intuitive interface with tools to build and deliver those digital experiences. Now, more specifically to today's topic on SEO, there are tools within Sitefinity to aid content creators and marketers with their SEO practices. But I'd like to pass now the mic over to Derek, who is going to lead us in this conversation about SEO ranking. So, Derek?
All right, thanks, MeiLani. Appreciate it. My name is Derek Larabee. I am an SEO team lead, as we discussed earlier. I've been with the company, with Spinutech, for about 8 years, going on 9, really focusing on that SEO space. So SEO as an agency, ultimately, we're not just a Sitefinity partner, premier partner that develops. Obviously, we are, but we also have a whole team of digital marketing experts that provide that ongoing marketing support for clients across a range of verticals. So this goes from B2B franchise models into the agriculture space, healthcare, and so much more. So today, what we have for you guys is just kind of a quick presentation with a lot of information on just, what are those sort of top of mind ongoing SEO strategy areas that, you should be focusing on. Some of what we'll talk about are kind of newer developments in the space. A lot of them have a foundation that goes back a lot further than that. And then, others have been things that we've been, advocating for quite some time, but they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And so you could ultimately look at the things that we're going to discuss today as just those ongoing considerations for, any SEO strategy that you are looking to implement. So let's go ahead and jump into the first slide that's surrounding experience. So for this particular idea, we have some groundwork to lay. Going back and kind of going back to the end of 2022, there was something called a helpful content update that was first rolled out into that search ranking algorithm in about August 2022. That event laid the foundation for further updates of a similar focus that kind of finished around that December 2022 timeframe. And at that time, what happened was Google updated something called quality rater guidelines, and ultimately added and updated an acronym that had been around for quite some time. That acronym is EAT, which you see here. Now, with an extra E, usually referred to as double EAT in some instances. That original EAT acronym just really stood for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And really what that is, to simplify that, is just guidelines and framework for anybody that's creating content for users on the web. And it's especially important with certain verticals. But ultimately, it's what Google search raters use to evaluate the performance of their own ranking algorithms. And so ultimately, it's not something that's directly influencing search results, but you could view it as an overarching methodology that should be layered in to your content itself. And so, ultimately with that addition of that extra E in that acronym, that search rater guideline document had this to say about it, and I'll kind of read it verbatim because it's really important. Consider the extent to which the content creator has the necessary firsthand or life experience for the topic. Many types of pages are trustworthy and achieve their purpose well when created by people with a wealth of personal experience. For example, which would you trust? A product review from someone who has personally used the product, or a review by someone who has not? So ultimately, that's what they're advocating for. They're really pushing for, that firsthand, real-world user experience when you're in the search engine and trying to speak to folks about the products or services your website's providing. So we'll jump to the next slide and kind of look at that in a little bit more detail and kind of go a little bit further on what's being asked here and expected. With an update of this large of a size, Google will sometimes publish sort of guidance on ultimately what they're looking for or what has changed. And so, ultimately, this is what it's going to mean for ongoing SEO. That helpful content is just looking to do what this slide exactly says. It's looking to better reward content where visitors feel they've had a satisfying experience. And so, ultimately, that's going to be really important when you get into, creating topics for your actual site. And so, some of the things that Google has sort of offered is sort of, guidance and expectations about things to ask yourself. And so to best play by the rules, some of those things are listed here. Creating content for search engines is something that we shouldn't ever be trying to do. Ultimately, it's a world out there where we need to be having meaningful conversations with our target audience, and that's ultimately what the big advocacy is there. So if we jump to this next slide, you can kind of get a little bit more detail on that. But you need to be considering how you can showcase that experience and factor that into your SEO-driven strategy. And so when you're putting together any sort of ongoing content strategy, whether it be a blog or some sort of resource type, always, we're going to say this a lot, but start with that keyword research or that upfront evaluation of terms related to the products or services your site is providing. Ultimately, if you're trying to think about what these terms should be, we always try to say, use that empathetic approach. Put yourself in the user's shoes who is searching for, your product or service, and ask yourself, how would you search for those products or services online? What are the things you would be searching for and looking for? Because that's often, that initial foundation of where to start that strategy. Something that you'd be surprised, to know is it's often the assumption with a lot of businesses that a customer base, their particular customer is just too advanced, or certain topics are beneath that user audience because they already know about this particular concept. But in some cases that can be right, but a really good content strategy that's aimed at driving SEO results considers the nuance of those keywords and tries to answer them from the right point of view with respect to the actual consumer that is reading and consuming and performing the searches for that answer. And so when you're thinking through this, how are your products and services provided? So with respect to that nuance that we talked about just moments ago, what does that look like for what you do and what your site offers? Think about things like, what is your unique process for delivering a product and or service? Some of the areas that you can start to explore are topics around prepping the user for what it's like to engage with a business like yours. And then hopefully, it will be you who they actually do that business with if you can provide that best answer as you sort of educate that user through the funnel on their path toward, ultimately a conversion. Websites with a product focus, this is a little bit more straightforward. Websites with products and things for sale that are tangible, obviously they can go in deeper depth with, overviews, makes and model details. And so all of that plays into, what you can showcase, about a particular topic. And again, these are questions that, if strategized correctly, can move the user through that education phase prior to ultimately a conversion. And so, just to kind of put the final points onto this is, if you think back to those timeframes between, that August 2022 toward the end of Q4 last year, if you notice, any kind of decline in organic traffic or, anything that seemed like some sort of downturn where you typically see traffic from organic, I would encourage you to kind of research some of that update and ask yourself those questions that Google provided in that update. If that was a large enough drop, then certainly a larger SEO audit is likely warranted, just to try to pinpoint where things went wrong and if there's any identifiable adjustments that you can make in your content strategy to make that site rank a little bit better and perform better for the keywords in your target.
I'd like to add in here, Derek, too, that as you're talking, I'm thinking about Sitefinity's, content validation and workflow, how it could also help ensure that the content is on the right message, that it includes all of the metadata and all the detail that's needed to really get that point across and kind of meet that right message. So.
Yeah, especially for really large teams that are, have a lot of different players in that content creation process, that can be a really, really great tool.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to jump to this next idea of just addressing different types of search. Ultimately, something that we've needed to be ready for a long time, and is still going to be true into the future, is that, our target audiences are looking for things and researching products and services on the internet on a ton of different devices. And just as unique as those devices are, is their unique preference for the ways that they consume information. And so through a lot of our upfront strategy, we can try to get in front of some of those different methods as a way to, again, just get information out to users in the best way possible, aligned with their preference in consuming said information. So the first search type we'll look at is voice. On this next slide is that it's usually aligns with a longer tail type of keyword data. What do I mean by longer tail? These are keywords that just feel and look a lot more like sentences. And so when you're researching, again, when you're starting to think about the ways that folks are searching for your product and or service, when you look at these types of keywords, they again feel more like sentences, and they have a lot more contextual wording wrapped around them. How do I do a certain thing? What is the cost for a particular service? And so that makes them really easy to understand from a user intent perspective. So what does that user really mean or want? And so when you see these types of topics in your upfront research, whether you're doing this in-house or working with an agency partner, put your point of view on those topics that are the most relevant in your space. Individuality and putting your unique spin on it can make all the difference, especially in topic spaces where, there's a lot of folks trying to have a conversation and a seat at that table. But using those long tail keywords as sort of a beginning starting point for voice search, it helps align with the type of searches that are conducted over, that voice medium. And because it's a spoken type of search term, it can often be those long tail type of sentence queries. That is ultimately the way that they're feeding, a question into a search engine via that avenue. And so again, when you're thinking about these and trying to identify what these are, sometimes it can be a really good idea to, tap in with some of those initial sales teams or those business development departments to understand, what are those conversations or what are those big sticking points that they have when they're talking with prospects, because then those can be layered back into your content strategy. And again, just that relevance of information in that format can really be helpful, especially if you're in a space where you're seeing a lot of traffic on keywords that come from that voice avenue. This next slide will look at sort of addressing video. So switching gears a little bit, looking at that visual side of things. Like I said earlier, every one of these slides could easily start with that keyword research as that beginning step. This is true here, just like the slide notes. Ultimately, if you're going to make the investment in video, you want to make sure that you're strategizing video topics that are centered on the types of things that are most commonly delivered as a video answer. And obviously, then we layer in, your specific niche corner of the search engine results landscape. You can often identify, especially in particular verticals, where video is much more of an influencer than other spaces. Imagine a parts type of website or something with a lot of folks looking on how to do something, it can be a really good idea for sites like that to have those video explanations and tutorials and how to, because those are folks with an easily identifiable need for that actual product and or service. So it can be a really good idea to look at video overlaid in your keyword target list to be able to try to identify the best topics to go after in conquest. If you're looking at existing video content, ultimately the goal there is to tell the story for the search engine of what that type of content is displaying. So obviously we can go through steps to optimize that particular information, and some of this is more detailed on the next slide, but ultimately that's where you can get into describing describing the attributes of that video, creating detailed descriptions. Ultimately, you're just unpacking and educating the search engine on the contents of that video via crawlable text in some instances. There's also structured data outputs that can be used to optimize. And also, we just want to be mindful of any kind of performance issues that can come along with video. And so making sure that the platform can deal with that. And obviously, it's always a good idea to consider where that video is hosted as a overall page speed and performance. This next and final type is just images. So by nature, there are some businesses in some sort of categories that have a product or service that is much more sought after in image search. Think about certain products or even local service providers whose service really surfaces or creates a noticeable or a different outcome. I have a neighbor who is in a landscaping business, and that would be a particular vertical where different types of landscaping and materials would be really, really influential images to have on a site. This is just basically think of your business and layer in the consideration of are there things that users want to see, and again, back to that keyword research conversation point, a lot of the tools that you can use to pull keyword data will give you data points on how much of that particular keyword is served via image results. So you can really layer certain keyword targets and certain content types into that category. Ultimately, if you're in one of those verticals, it's just a really good idea to understand that as a basis. But then moving further on, make sure that you're using original imagery wherever possible. And with that imagery, you need to make describing them with alt text descriptions, just as a way to be able to educate the search engine, because this is just sort of that reminder that that search engine is a machine. It doesn't have eyes that can see and understand photos, and so to aid that understanding of that content on a page, it's important to optimize those fields. As you strategize content and messaging in 2023 and beyond, just the linchpin here, the overarching sort of the overarching consideration here is just to start with research to just best inform that structure and get the right information types on based on the vertical where you're trying to rank.
And you brought up the alt text and the optimization, and those are all features that, again, that Sitefinity supports out of the box. With its media management, we can manage all different types of assets, not just images, but the videos, documents, and if you needed, specific metadata for SEO, you can extend the properties and add them on there. And again, bringing back content validation, making sure that those images all have the alt text supplied. There's a lot of tools to help with compression of those large files, images specifically. We have some auto generation of, again, specific to images, auto generation of responsive images, again, file compression, tagging, alt text. So again, those will all assist in the strategy with your SEO practices.
Absolutely. So this next, kind of switching gears again and jump into this next area of focus, just thinking local. Especially for certain services and solutions. Ultimately, as far back as even 2017, there were stats floating around on the web of searches containing near me growing by, 150 times faster than comparable searches that didn't compare that type of modifier. So in 2023, some years later, it's really important to understand how your business model relates to these types of local searches and keywords. For this, think about really large B2C multi-location franchise models as kind of that example in your mind. If you're in this space, if you're a business with a national service footprint, with a lot of local brick and mortar locations and tons of individual search markets, then this is going to really be an influential area for you to kind of sink your teeth into from a strategy standpoint. So one example I kind of thought about when I was thinking through this is, think about a pest control company that operates, across a region of the country. Let's say they're in northern states and in southern states in the United States. Those folks are going to treat and provide protection against a lot of different things, depending on the area that they're in. They're going to have different seasonality. And so again, these are all the types of things that need to be layered into a local strategy to be able to have the most relevant and nuanced conversation with those audiences. And so we'll get into the next slide and kind of unpack that a little bit more. But the first piece of this is to really make sure that your site architecture or the pages that you're planning out and building accounts for that location format, especially with the areas you serve. And so typically these URL folders start with state, where applicable, they roll into actual cities. And what we're building toward is a physical location page, and ultimately something that will correspond with local listings as well. And so, what we want to do is develop unique pages that have those nuanced messaging and experiences for those local audiences. That localized content should really look at nuances of that product or service for the audience that's consuming the message. It's just as equally important to point out that locations without that nuance, don't just create content to create content, right? If there's truly not an actual nuance, then there's probably not a need for local content to that degree. You can rely more on centralized, service or solution pages as that education piece. But for business models where that experience is really unique, this is really a place to look at as far as on-site optimizations and additional content. And again, I've said it before, but we're really just looking at nuances here when we think about this. And so looking at the next slide, ultimately, what we're saying here is, oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Go backwards. One more slide. Ultimately, what we're doing here is considering things like, how does a potential customer enlist this service? Is the process unique in that location, or is it consistent with the greater collection of locations? Are there service level agreements that need to be educated or communicated? How will that prospective customer know that they need the service you're providing? These are all types of local considerations that can be layered in to some of these pages that are meant to speak to users in those markets. And so ultimately, I always try to talk to folks and encourage people to look at this as an opportunity to talk to your audience about your product or service and educate them on how to use it, get started, et cetera. Because if you're the one providing that answer and you're doing it effectively, then that information, ideally over time, can stand and create a better first contact between you and folks that are engaging with your business, because you're doing that upfront education. Another use for this type of stuff is, obviously in local markets, teams can use this type of content to share out, to support and aid in that conversion process or in that sales cycle. So, it can be really used in a variety of different ways after it's created. And then, from there, with all of that great information on those location pages, then you can start to look out and branch out into creating local listing profiles for every physical address. That, the most prominent being Google Business Profile, but there are tons of listings out there where you can ultimately tap in with other platforms to have them validate that you are who you are and that your business does what it does. So MeiLani, if you want to jump in and speak to a different aspect of localization being language. I think that's a really important.
I was going to say localization for one region, but also for your international sites as well, right? You can localize, you know, in different areas, localize in a single country, other countries. And so when it comes to assisting with managing all that content, again, Sitefinity really has a lot of great translation and multi-language support features to help manage all of that, because that's a lot of content. You know, we can support, you know, Sitefinity enables creators to localize a site in as many language versions as necessary. You can localize pages, content, taxonomies, and so on. And from a translation perspective, you can, you know, take a manual approach to managing the multi-language, or you can utilize our translation services to automate that process and connect with an external translation agency. So there's a lot of features, again, to kind of support the requirements for localized content.
Absolutely. And, you know, just to piggyback on that, there are tons of optimization considerations to be made for localized content of different languages. You know, MeiLani mentioned the site architecture and pages, subfolders. And so if that's something that resonates with your business model, just, you know, obviously make sure that you're tapping into the right folks to be able to, you know, just talk through that strategy and make sure that you're not inadvertently getting yourself into duplicate content issues or anything like that with that lack of tagging and organization at that URL folder level. All right, so we're going to jump now to just website performance. You know, something we always say about website performance is, you know, if you're in one of those really competitive search engine result pages or spaces, performance can be that tiebreaker. So, you know, if you're looking at, you know, keyword position comparisons across your competitor base, and you know, you find that you're really kind of teetering the line of winning, not winning, then, you know, performance can be that differentiator. And so if you're, you know, looking at something like a website rebuild, then, you know, the things you need to be considering if you're in that, you know, sort of phase of things are that it should start at the template level. Planning out what the page looks like, what the page does, you know, should ultimately begin at that design phase. Or the planning of the actual site. You know, ultimately, it's oftentimes, you know, certain design components or functionality or, you know, supporting media types that can have the biggest impact on some of these performance scores, especially with page speed. And so, you know, obviously, we want to make sure that we are, you know, putting our foot forward in planning out the best possible outcomes up front. But, you know, you're not always designing a website. You know, you're not always in that rebuild phase. And so what if you need to fix performance issues on a site that's, you know, already existing? You know, ultimately, the truth is performance needs to be an ongoing aspect of your performance monitoring. It's not something that you're going to just get right and be able to walk away from. And so something that we really try to reinforce, especially in our ongoing agreements, is, you know, just the continual monitoring of that performance and those core web vitals. Just as a way to, you know, keep that idea top of mind, and you know, obviously to be able to identify things proactively and fix them. There are a lot of free tools out there, like the one mentioned here, Google Search Console, to kind of help you get a preliminary understanding of how your site is performing. Again, you know, simple validation of this platform will give you a ton of data, and this data just calls out those performance issues. And so that's a great first step in identifying those types of opportunities, and, you know, ultimately being able to resolve them. Going to the next slide and focusing a little bit more on technical health. You know, this should be on the list every year. You know, this, if we're calling this a 2023 webinar, I would advocate that this is on every one of them. And so, you know, in 2023 and beyond, you know, make sure that you're, just like core web vitals and page speed performance, you're keeping ongoing accountability over things like, you know, your secure connection protocols, HTTPS versus HTTP. You know, with a lot of different folks inside of a system, or, you know, populating links or doing certain things, you can, you know, really, there could be issues that arise that just need to be proactively resolved. Page speed, obviously a really big one. Crawlability is a really important one as well. So how well can search engines reach in and see and consume the content on your site? There are mechanisms that we can use to be able to serve that content more effectively. Indexability, what can the search engine do with that content to sort of store away a copy of it? Obviously, anything that is redirect issues or anything stemming from those types of activities can cause performance issues or technical issues for the overall health. And so ultimately, the takeaway here is to make sure you're maintaining an ongoing audit schedule for those technical issues and planning remediation of the same. Site owners or anybody that are trying to resolve SEO issues should have that open line of communication to development resources, just to be able to work with those folks who have that technical expertise in a platform like Sitefinity to implement changes or make any audits or updates to pages and resolve anything that might be out there and might be causing an issue for SEO metrics that we like to commonly monitor.
I think this section really just kind of showcases that really it's everybody plays a part, right? It's content editors, it's developers, it's IT administrators, because security of the site, caching, optimization, making sure that the content is verified and it's the right content. It really crosses all of the users of the system, whether you're constantly creating content every day or managing the site or developing the templates, for your site. It all plays a role here.
Absolutely. All right, final point, AI. Like we say here, you're not going to be able to go to an SEO webinar in this year at least without hearing about this. And so this is our chance to kind of say, easy, let's step slowly here. And so ultimately, our words of wisdom here are just be cautious about these new shiny tools and all of that hype surrounding them. If we think back to the beginning of this presentation and the information that we first shared about that helpful content update, with that, you saw that one of those questions that we, in that list and a question that is part of that documentation is asking, are you using extensive automation to produce content on many topics? And so, while simultaneously search engines are trying to innovate their ability to produce results with some of these technologies, they're at the same time they're cautioning, the degree to which pieces are created and published with these tools. And so, obviously, that's something that we need to keep in mind while we dive into some of these different capabilities. And so, ultimately, the preferences that are outlined in that quality rater guidelines document that we alluded to before, they just still favor content that is created by users and for users. And so, at least where we are right now, a machine cannot, it cannot provide that firsthand experience. And so, with that sort of validating question, the outcome there is just that AI content and content created from AI just shouldn't make its way onto the site or onto your website. But that doesn't stop you from using these tools to experiment and obviously add some efficiency to mundane processes. So things like researching certain topics or trying to get an idea of the different search variations on a particular idea. And on this next slide, we have some of these details. But ultimately, when it comes to certain strategic points like content planning, if you're trying to get your imagination going about certain ways to tackle a topic, or AI tools can even create structured data outputs in some instances. So when we talk about optimizations, there are certain prompts that can have those tools write that info. You can do some data analyses at scale. Obviously, being able to process more data at a faster efficiency is always going to be something that we're looking to be able to utilize. And then, audits of certain small portions of a site are other ways that, folks are using these tools to be able to look at, headings across a particular site and understand, certain attributes of the larger data set. Those are just a couple of ideas on ways that we're trying to experiment and develop meaningful outcomes from the tool that ultimately influence what real world writers will still do. So at the end of the day, it's just not a replacement for putting in the actual work to understand your customers, understand their needs relative to the product or service you provide, and really putting in the time and effort to be able to educate through your site content or through some of the optimizations on your site. And that is sort of what we had for you all today.
Oh, great. So let's go into some of the Q&A. I see 1, 2, 3 questions out there. This would go to Derek. How does Google or search engines identify testimonials and reviews on the site? And also,
Sure.
and hold on there, are there certain elements or language on the page that make it easier for Google to identify them?
Yeah, so let's see, reviews and testimonials. We'll kind of start there, and then obviously we can go into on-page elements, which I think is ultimately the kind of source of curiosity there. So from a review testimonial standpoint, I would encourage you to obviously tell stories around your product or service wherever that area on your site is most relevant for that message to be consumed. And so if you have, let's say, a SaaS solution, a relevant testimonial near the feature or benefit that that particular point is trying to close out, that's a really good place for something like that. Ultimately, that's the work that you can do on your side to publish those things to the domain and make that information public. There are also a lot of third-party review gathering, testimonial sort of gathering and solicitation tools that you can do some research on if you have a product or something that is sold at scale or in mass. Oftentimes it's that third party aggregation and generation and then implementation of those reviews on the site, especially in for folks selling goods and services online. Having that third party tool aggregate and obviously remove any concerns of manipulation are always going to be beneficial. So those are kind of the two ways. I think if I'm staying high level here, obviously incorporating them into your page messaging, into your actual design to be able to showcase and tell those stories, and making sure that they're crawlable and indexable and consumable by the search engine. That's kind of the one side of it. And then the other is just, ultimately, if you are in a heavy product category space, looking to the market for, third-party tools that can help, feature some of those things, not to mention just any out-of-the-box capabilities that might be present. From, the other side of that question, as far as, any specific areas on the site that you can use, it sounded like to maybe feature keywords more prominently or feature different types of information more prominently. There's certainly a hierarchical organization that can happen on a page through things like heading classes. So you have H1, H2, H3. Those areas of the site can be really good places to obviously infuse some of those keywords and some of those terms and types. That's obviously those headings should be able to provide the user with a pretty high level understanding of the topics and sections within that page. So when you think about crawlable on-page content, that's really one of those big areas. Not to mention, a lot of the things you can do with just meta descriptions, the naming of the URL, and making sure that you're incorporating the appropriate keywords. There's really a lot of different areas where you can highlight and elevate certain messaging.
Great.
Especially with keywords. Yep.
Okay, well, the next question would be just to clarify about using original imagery. Will using stock images hurt SEO?
No, I don't think it will necessarily hurt SEO. I think that, one of the central themes of content creation, especially with regard to the goal of organic search, is just the more original you can be, the more you're going to set yourself apart from, competitors in your space. I would say too that one of the benefits with using original photography is, you can really take photos and imagery that build the user's understanding of a page. With that tip on alt text, being, if you could imagine yourself closing your eyes and having that alt text description read to you, and you would understand what the image is. Well, if you layer that into custom photography and images that tell that story really effectively, then you have a natural ability to just use, keywords or relative keywords when you're describing the image, because it does feature, the product that you have for sale or an outcome of a service that you provide. And so, that's really the big benefit there, is you can really set yourself up for success downstream when, you're optimizing the entire picture of, well, that's kind of an unintentional pun, but the entire picture of the page, right? When you're putting all of those things into play, original imagery just allows for that a little bit better.
Great. Well, I think the next question will go over to MeiLani. MeiLani, what is the most underutilized SEO tool within Sitefinity?
Okay. I'm actually in a pre-sales position, so I definitely point out all of the capabilities for SEO with the customers. I imagine some of them are not utilized. When you're talking about, we talked about the different types of assets and how we have optimization, file op compression, alt tagging, alt text. I suspect that maybe some are overlooking utilizing those features around content, structured content, being able to extend the out-of-the-box structure of our content, utilizing URL management, caching, page redirects. These are things that I definitely point out. But to say which ones are underutilized, I don't know. I would actually ask Derek that. What do you think, Derek? Do you see people not taking advantage of many of these features? Like, do they encourage them to use them?
Yeah, I think if I take a step back and just think about the common things that I see on just websites in general, that we look at in a variety of spaces, it really is just a lack of understanding of how all of these pieces flow together. And so, if we're talking, underutilization, it's obviously, the importance of meta is pretty well understood, of things like metadata. But, the words that you're using inside of a heading module, are they keyword influenced? And have you really thought about, the user's, goal or intent with searching a particular topic that should map back to a page? And so ultimately, it's more so just underutilization of some of these tactics and sort of principal things that we've come to know as ideas that the search engine really preferences and prefers, that I think are more so lacking utilization than a particular tool set. And the shameless plug there is just obviously it's important to have an expert. If it's not someone on your team, then some sort of agency partner that can help you at least walk through those considerations. But as part of that relationship, those folks should really be getting in the weeds with you and learning your business, learning your model to be able to do those things effectively. So that's really what I would say is more underutilized, is just the process itself. And I think secondary to that, sites can get themselves in a lot of trouble with just simple crawlability things, the way the search engine interacts with the site itself. And again, that's part of that ongoing monitoring aspect of things. So, yeah.
Great. Another question for you, Derek. Can you discuss duplicate content further? Would the same content item on multiple pages with different file paths count as duplicate content?
Yeah, so there are things that you can do. Let's say you need, it's hard to come up with an example off the cuff of why you would need well, here's one. Let's say you are, there's a situation where you have a parent company and then you have child companies that are at different URLs. Sometimes sites like to share information across those domains. And so there are things called canonical tags that you can consider that ultimately are a tag that goes on the back end of a page that says, hey, search engine, we know that this is a duplicate of another page, and that page is at this URL. And all it does is it just sort of assigns for the search engine ownership of that particular piece of or collection of words. You can deploy those canonical tags for URLs that are on a different domain like I described, or you can do it for a different URL on your own site. The sort of standard is having a self-referencing canonical in place where the page sort of points to itself. But if you're having different pages that have to say the same thing for whatever business case, then you can utilize that tag. I think the context in which we talked about it earlier was through language. And so there's something called an href language tag that helps dispel duplicate content of different languages. And that really starts at that URL and architecture planning phase, where you're considering different subfolders for different languages as a way to separate out pages that say the same thing but in a different language. And those href language tags function a lot like canonical tags, where they say, hey, if a user is in this country, display this version of the page as the primary source of content. But then, search engine, there are all of these alternate pages that say the same thing that live at these different URLs for their respective country code. And again, this is just a proactive measure to clarify anything that might be going on from a technical sense, where we have to have different conversations with local nuance, but we have to acknowledge that we know that content is the same and it's for good reason.
Great. Well, thank you, Derek. This next one will go to MeiLani. MeiLani, do you have any advice on how to optimize your content when it comes to personalization and in particular with Sitefinity Insights functionality and features?
Optimize the content. So I guess I'm not. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Do you have any advice how to optimize your content when it comes to personalization and in particular with Sitefinity Insights functionality and features?
Well, I think with personalization is important. The strategy on, again, I've looked to the expert here on the different strategies to kind of take advantage of those features. I mean, we support content personalization, knowing your audience personas, and again, when you're tying into Sitefinity Insight, understanding your contacts, utilizing personas, I think will help give you more of an insight as to who's visiting your site, and you're able to set up the personalizations or those user segments for each of, for those targeted audiences. Derek, do you have anything to add to that specifically? Any strategies?
Strategies specific to optimization. I think we've talked about a lot of the different areas where I would focus. Obviously, the way you're organizing concepts on the page, paying close attention to what keyword data is telling you for which search variations should be discussed on the page are kind of a really big piece of content creation and therefore optimization. I would say don't let the fear of not getting it right prevent you from getting helpful content out there onto your website, because part of that process should be iteratively looking at and evaluating the performance of those pages on an iterative basis. So every 90 days or so you should be looking back into your publish log, just about 90 days in arrears, to be able to say, hey, what's going on with that stuff that we published 3 months ago? How is it performing? Does it need more information? So that's really a big piece of it. And I think with regards to the workflows, it's really just getting everything set up to a point where certain things are routing to the right folks for approval, and obviously permissions are implemented correctly. So content isn't making its way out to the web before it's ready to be consumed by the general public.
Yeah. I will say that from Insight, Will does give you the ability to see how your content's working for you. You can set up conversions, and there's touch points in there to see what they're hitting. What is that content intended to them to drive into what's the next step you're trying to drive them to. So all of the analytics around how that content is operating for you certainly comes in the reports within Insight. So again, if you're tracking specific content, if you're looking to see if the content you have is leading to those conversions in the way that you planned, those are all things that are coming in the reports from Sitefinity Insight. That does give you that information.
Yeah, and I think too, when you think about, a metric like time on a particular page, right? Or, the bounce rate of a particular page, those things can tell you a lot about how well that page answered a user's question or, satisfied a user's need. And so, you can start there as an initial identifying point of, hey, this page might be one to look at. And so, don't be afraid to, use those metrics that tell you about a user's experience to be able to start that priority if you are fearful that you have a lot of content out there that needs to be refreshed or needs to be needs to have that facelift. I mentioned Search Console earlier too, but that's I can't stress enough the value of the keywords that you'll get in a tool like that. So setting up a tool like that to be able to give you that feedback at a URL level for the keywords in which a page is ranking is really, really important, especially if you're trying to get something like this going on in-house.
Great. Right, I'm going to move on to the next question. Does Sitefinity plan to come out with an out-of-the-box tool to support CCPA-GPC consent checks for the website?
So Sitefinity has an out-of-the-box support for managing users' consent to process personal information. So I'm not sure if I quite understand the question. So you can ask for people's consent for tracking them. So that we have that is part of, we do support that in the current version.
Okay, great. All right, can you have too many H2s and H3s? I'm not sure what that is.
Now you're gonna make me start saying the it depends thing. No, I think ultimately, you try to stick to one H1 on a page. And really, I think of headings more as hierarchies of information. And so, topics and sections of the page that are similar in size and depth should probably align to the same heading class. And then subpoints of an H2, should be that H3. Typically sites can get caught up in, trying to be too rigid and think that headings need to cascade. But it's not to say that once you've gone through on a page from top to bottom, H1 to 4, you can't reintroduce a new idea at an H2. Because ultimately, you're talking page structure there. And like I said, a good sort of gut check on that on headings themselves are, can you scan them and be able to walk away without reading the subtext and understand, what that page is going to provide you from an education and value standpoint. So, I would say, obviously, limit the H1 usage. That's typically understood to be true, but then, don't let yourself get afraid of using a subheading class like H2 through 4, in more than one way, as long as the information type, like I said, kind of, matches what's been done prior on the page.
All right, Derek, this is the last question I will ask you.
All right.
Are long headings still an issue?
Long headings. Yeah, so again, they can be very large page load elements. So, a really large heading class can obviously be something that, weighs down and becomes that largest contentful paint. And so, that's one consideration for that. I think, I would just challenge you as you're considering headings on a page. Again, are they readable? Are they something that a user can consume at, that typical consumption rate? If it's too long and you're starting to get into multiple sentences, then that's probably information that should be prioritized in some sort of subheading or on-page copy. The biggest thing for headings to keep in mind is just, use keywords where relevant. And, as a way to be able to use keywords, plan the overall topic of a page ahead of time. So you can be strategic and you can layer in some of those different search engine nuances that the data from keyword research will tell you. So, obviously keep headings short and concise, but, I don't think you're going to break rankings, if they do trend a little long, I would just encourage you to, again, focus on readability, focus on that ease of consumption. Because when you start to think about a really large heading being collapsed down onto a mobile device and a smaller screen, that's where things can start to be problematic. So short and concise is kind of, going to always sort of win out in preference.
I think that's a wrap. So thank you, Derek, for this great presentation, and MeiLani for providing the Sitefinity insight. It was a pleasure to have this audience here with us today, and I hope you join us for future partner webinars as well, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.